She is.
She is.
Right.
Okay, and we're live.
Okay, it's 8:33. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We're still waiting for one more commissioner, but we'll go ahead and get started. First, we can welcome our newest commissioner, Scott Lamb. This is his first meeting, so we welcome him, and also wanted to thank the city manager and Karen for joining our meeting today to give us an update on the public safety budget. So we have everyone here except for Amin, and we'll start our meeting to see if there's any public comment. Do we have any public comment?
There's no public comment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So the first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from April 13th, 2020. And Scott, I know this is your first meeting, so usually if you don't attend a meeting, you'll just abstain as far as approving the minutes or not. So has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from our April 13th meeting? Any comments, edits? Hey, Amin. How are you?
Hey, Jeremy. Hi, everybody.
I'm good.
Sorry,
Motion to
a couple
approve.
minutes late.
Okay, I'll second the motion to approve. All in favor?
Aye.
Everybody?
I'm gonna abstain because I left the meeting a little early last
Okay.
week.
Okay, so if I'm correct, everybody except for Stephanie and Scott has voted yes. And anybody again for our April 13th meeting. And the next item on the agenda is a budget presentation by the city manager and finance director. And once again, thank you for joining our meeting and providing us with this update. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for having us. Good morning, everyone. Like you said, I'll be making a financial presentation as part of the budget outreach, and I believe we do have a PowerPoint to accompany those slides. Let's see.
Let me go ahead and pull it up.
Okay. And Kenya, I will indicate next slide so that we can keep it moving accordingly.
Thank you.
I'll just get started by saying that the coronavirus health pandemic has obviously had immediate and catastrophic effects on health, of course, but also on the economy. Many local governments, as us, have been hit particularly hard as we continue to rely on revenue sources which directly stem from economic activity. And as social distancing continues, the effects on the economy are going to be compounding. Many economists are suggesting that even after the social lifting bans are lifted, recovery will be very slow. Today, what we're going to look at is the impacts in terms of effect and recovery by seeing how the city's top revenue sources might be affected. We'll break this down into 3 time frames. Kenya, next slide. Short term through June 30th, 2020, which is the end of the fiscal year. Midterm, which is through the end of June 30th, 2021, next fiscal year. And long term, which is 3 years and beyond. Next slide, please. The city's top 4 revenue sources include property tax, sales tax, the utility users tax or UUT, and user fees. Half of the city's general fund is brought in by property tax, or $15 million. Property taxes, we receive 24 cents on the dollar of those property taxes, which are assessed at 1%. Property taxes are typically slow to respond to economic downturns simply because of the way they're assessed, due, and paid. If we look back at the Great Recession or even further back at the dot-com bubble, we typically see a 1 to 2% reduction in subsequent years, which still represents a fairly stable revenue. However, last week, Governor Newsom did announce an executive order that defers any kind of late payments, or actually forgives any late fees for late payments of property taxes and supplemental tax bills through next May of 2021. So we're still unsure of how that will affect us. Moving on to sales tax. Last November, the city approved a 3/4 cent sales tax under Measure A, which increased the city's sales tax to 10.25%, consistent with neighboring cities. Now, sales tax is very rapid to respond to economic downturns. Simply in this quarter, we've seen a 28% reduction in our top revenue drivers, including restaurants and gas stations. Again, Governor Newsom did issue an executive order for sales tax payments for small businesses to defer 1/4 of sales tax payments or split it out into the next year. Further, we don't know if those sales tax payments will ever be paid back. We don't know if there will be any further executive orders on that end. So with that, we will see a deep decline in sales tax revenues, but how deep is still left to be determined. And it would be a lot worse if we didn't have Measure A at this point. Moving on to the UUT, which is approximately 11% of the city's revenue and is a 7% tax on utilities such as water, electricity, cable, and telephones. This entire amount, or $3.4 million, goes to the city. And while this is unaffected by the pandemic, it is a diminishing revenue source, which means it continues to decline year by year based on behavioral patterns such as conservation of water or less reliance on cable and more reliance on streaming platforms like Netflix. It's important to note that the UUT is scheduled to sunset June 30th, 2022 if it's not renewed by voters. And finally, user fees, which bring in approximately 10% of the city's revenue. User fees are used to recover the cost of services provided. They are typically subsidized in cities like ours, in some areas more than others. We heavily subsidize community services fees. These fees are rapid to respond to economic downturn, but some haven't been as rapid to respond. Right now we're seeing increase in planning and building, which we think will slow down. But on the other hand, like I said, community services has come to a halt, or facility rentals have also completely stopped, just completely eradicating that revenue source for the rest of the year. Just simply on facility rentals, we will see a $200,000 loss through the end of the year. Now we'll get into a little bit of the short-term, midterm, and long-term reductions. In the short term, the city stands to lose about $1.6 million through June 30th, 2020. $100,000 in property taxes just through natural decline. UUT, like I said, is on track. We are receiving the same receipts as before through April. Sales tax received a decline about 13%, and that's both because of the reduction in our top revenue providers and because of the deferral of sales tax payments. And finally, user fees at approximately $1.2 million, which includes everything from parking fees, permits, facility rentals, like I mentioned, to community services fees. To match those short-term revenue losses, we needed to look at short-term revenue reductions. And we did that at the tune of approximately $1.7 million and looked everywhere in the budget. Everything from reduction in capital costs and reallocation in street expenses to hiring freeze, operational budget freezes, natural contract reductions, thank you, Kenya, and furlough of non-working part-time employees. Obviously, it would have been favorable to have a list to pick and choose from, but as you can see, we needed to rely on everything here to match the loss. Moving on to midterm revenue loss. Property taxes, we have at a 4% revenue loss, 1 to 2% following recessions as the pattern states, and 1 to 2% based on non-payment or deferral, which may increase depending on what we see that pattern's being and how many people take advantage of that executive order. On UUT, we see a 3% decline, and that's again a naturally diminishing revenue source. Under sales tax, we see a 15% decline at $600,000. We expect some of the businesses to pick up, but if that doesn't happen, this is an assumption of 2-quarter losses, so that might be higher than this number shown here, depending on how we recover. And other, again, that's user fees, and that's everything from fines and forfeitures, parking fees. If we're not bringing in any parking revenue at all, that's almost 400,000 for the city. And as people continue to stay at home, that'll dictate where this number goes. Right now, we see it at 31% loss, and that's through next year. So what we're faced with is closing a budget gap for next year. What we're looking at doing right now is considering all the short-term reductions still that I mentioned in the earlier slide, considering shifting additional dollars set aside for capital, any kind of MOU reopeners such as the elimination of COLAs and budget reductions in workforce. As you can see here, 70% of our entire general fund is allocated to personnel, 22% on operations, and 8% transfers out. That includes things like our LLMD fund and our capital costs. So reductions in operations can only go so far before you're able to provide the service. And after that, you're left looking at your departments. Kenya, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. The departments, if you look here, half of the department, as you probably are already aware of, goes to public safety, and everything after that is split pretty consistently throughout. But it's important to note here that we don't consider most of our services optional. You have public works that's required to issue permits. You have planning and building that's required to produce a general plan and a housing element. You have public safety that has to protect their citizens. You have finance that has to produce a budget and audit. So a lot of these things here, and I think many of our residents would argue that library and community services are essential services. So looking at everything, we don't have a lot of fluff here. And we're taking that into consideration as we go through our budget outreach. Right now, we have our budget website. I think I sent everyone the link. And that's a tool for communication and education right now. So far, we have 700 unique visitors that have visited that site. So for us, that's one of the most important things is engaging and educating our residents as to what our budget is comprised of and what our challenges are going to be. Part of that engagement will result in survey information that we'll use to, again, to determine the community's priorities and respond to them accordingly. Next is budget development. That all those survey results will go to the Finance Commission and then will be used to incorporate them into the draft budget that will go to Council June 3rd, 2020. And finally, we hope to adopt the budget. But as you can see here from this presentation, it's clear that it's either going to need regular amendments or we're going to need to see a lot more information before we really know where we stand. All this is our best guess right now, and it's based on consultants. It's based on historical data, but this, like I said at the beginning, is unprecedented, and we don't know what we don't know. We can't say how people will respond or how much federal aid we will receive, if any. I think it's important to note that a couple things, that we have not received federal aid to date other than the CDBG dollars at approximately $70,000. We haven't received any other kind of economic aid. And further, we are better off. I think a big question is, how are you doing in comparison to other cities? We are a lot better off than other cities simply because a lot of cities rely heavily on on revenues that are heavily impacted by economic activities such as TOT, a hotel tax, or 30 or 40% of their revenues are sales tax, and they have the car dealerships and the big box stores, which have seen a deep decline. And so they're affected a lot harder than we are, but we're all looking at the same kind of financial pictures right now. And looking at long-term, in 2022, thank you, Kenya, the city would need to reduce an additional $3.4 million from the budget if the UUT was not renewed. And at the same time in 2022, the city would start paying pension costs, resulting in the negative yields that were through this June. So right now we can see up to $2 million if we result in a negative 4% yield. So that would mean we would be facing a 5.4 additional liability to the city. And that's on top of the already 3.5 we need to reduce to close the budget gap. So this is kind of the doom and gloom, but as you can see, this is, reliant on a lot of factors. For PERS, it's depending on if the state funnels any money, what payment plans are available, how we can structure our finances to better pay off our pension liabilities. And again, UUT is completely dependent on our voters. And that concludes the presentation. Does anybody have questions? I'm happy to take questions now.
All right, Karen, thanks for that presentation. It provided a good overview of the city budget. I think what we wanted to try to get is that 51% for public safety is kind of just one big lump in all of these budget presentations. So do you have any additional information as far as how that breaks down between police, fire, personnel, equipment, overhead, just a little bit more depth within the public safety budget part?
Sure. So it's about 9 for police, 6 for fire, and maybe the chiefs can speak more to this, but particularly in these departments, a lot of the cost goes to personnel. Everything in their operations budget, and we've sat down and we've combed through their operation budgets over the past month, and there's not a lot of fluff in operations. It's typically about 1 to 2 million in operations, closer to the 1 million mark, and that's more equipment maintenance. In the fire department, they need to keep their rigs up to date, fuel costs, protective gear, all those costs, and they do keep them pretty minimal, add up to about 1 million, and everything else is attributed to personnel. They also have one of the highest PERS rates. So not in comparison, just generally public safety departments have some of the highest PERS liabilities. So a lot of that goes into their overhead for PERS.
Oh, I'm sorry, just one follow-up question. So you're saying 9 million annual budget for police, 6 million for fire, and each of those departments run about 1 million for ops, or 1 million together?
Each.
Okay.
I believe fire is less, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. You all know your budgets.
Yeah, so the overall fire budget, I believe, is just around 5 million, with the operations being just over 500,000.
Okay, and so the PERS cost is included in each department's budget, or overall city has like a PERS line item?
Both. So the city pays an annual PERS amount, and it pays a percentage of every employee's salary on a monthly basis as well, and that's their contribution rate, the employee-employer contribution rate. So that's built into the salary.
Just for clarification, so included in the fire department budget is the monthly amount for active and retired employees, or just active?
Just active.
And then the retirees comes out from the city bucket?
Yes,
Okay.
that's a separate line item. Mm-hmm.
That's all I have.
Sure.
Alan, I think you're on mute.
You are on, yeah.
Yeah, I had the famous South Pasadena parrots out there, so I muted. Karen, 2 questions.
Sure.
Police and fire historically have a very high overtime budget. And this year, they're both fully staffed, which is the first time they've both been fully staffed in, probably forever and a day. So this is really a question for Paula and Joe. How much of an opportunity is there to reduce the overtime?
I can speak for fire. Yeah, you're correct. If we're fully staffed currently, and that will offset the overtime costs. So the fire department is constantly staffed. So obviously when we have shortages in personnel or vacancies in those positions, then those are filled with overtime. One additional note for fire is that we do participate in the state's Master Mutual Aid program with large-scale brush fires, which we do receive approximately $150,000 in revenues back to the city for reimbursement for those strike team assignments.
And just to add to that, I did include part of that on the budget outreach page that I can't say it better than you all can, but there are unprecedented investigations sometimes or actions that require a higher personnel and more overtime. So it's dependent on that as well. And also staffing changes throughout the year. So yeah, we can certainly budget less, but we have to take into consideration how much less to budget. We can't, if we completely eliminate that budget and then we have staffing constraints, then we would be shooting ourselves in the foot.
Obviously, but that would be one of the line items I would look at.
Yes.
My other question on your revenue slide, with property tax, sales tax, UUT, and user fees, if I was jotting the numbers down correctly, property tax is about 51%, sales tax 13%, UUT 11%, and user fees 10%.
Yes.
That's only 75%. What's the other 25% of revenue?
The other 25%, it's grants, transfers in from the water fund, it's franchise fees, it's motor in lieu vehicle adjustments. It's all very small pots of money. So without being too detailed for the general public, we keep it to the top 4 revenue sources, but just.
Okay, I would just say, as a former finance guy, you might want to add one more line in there for other miscellaneous fees, 25%.
Sure.
Because otherwise it seems like a pretty glaring error.
Yeah, and in the budget presentation, we do have them broken out up to the 100%, so it gets very detailed, but we will include that. Thanks for the feedback.
Okay, and just on the sales tax, and this is probably available someplace on the city's website, who are the, 5 largest sales taxpayers in the city?
I don't believe I can provide all that information. I believe that's confidential, but I can provide a list of the top producers. And like I said, their offices and restaurants and gas stations.
But not the supermarkets.
No, the supermarkets aren't at the top, but they have seen a slight increase. And supermarkets aren't all taxable goods, so we don't see all the sales tax. Surprisingly, we don't see all the sales tax from them, but they have increased over the past quarter.
Okay.
Commissioner Ehrlich, if I can just update you on the PD side of things. So
Yeah, Chief.
PD budget's just over $9 million. About 80 to 85% are personnel costs. Right now we have 3 vacant full-time positions. And similar to fire, when you get closer to being fully staffed, you don't have to look to your overtime budget to cover certain shifts. So we're pretty much in line with how PD or how fire department operates.
Okay, Chief, let me ask then. I know we had a couple of officers finishing up at the academy and at least one additional motor officer getting his training. When you say we're 80 to 85%.
80 to 85% personnel costs.
Staffed, is that including or excluding those recent hires?
So the 80 to 85% is personnel costs of that just over $9 million budget for the PD. Updates on the 2 new recruits. One recruit lasted a day and a half. He tapped out. The second recruit went on for 2 weeks. They took a break because of the coronavirus. The academy shut down. He starts back on Thursday, so we're keeping our fingers crossed to keep him going.
And that says as if it were fully staffed, because you have to budget for those vacancies as well.
Okay, those are my questions.
I have a quick question. How, I imagine you guys are following the federal and or state legislation coming down the pike, and it's hard to say what what that's going to be and how much of that's going to be usable. But is the city taking any steps to get involved in lobbying efforts, either in Sacramento or elsewhere, in terms of how these things are presented? Are there efforts by cities to kind of band together to approach legislators about it?
Yeah, and actually, the League of California Cities has been has been at the forefront of this battle, I'll call it. They've been writing letters nonstop, and they're taking a little bit of a different approach. Early on, they asked the cities to predict how much revenue loss they would be facing in the wake of this through the end of the year, and they aggregated that data to show that it would be an over $7 billion loss, I believe, for just California. And all there, and basically broke it down to what it meant to cities, having to look at their public safety for reductions, having to completely shut down their community services programs, put that together and went to Washington, to try to lobby for those dollars in the third bill. That wasn't successful, but now I think they do have a very bold plan. But again, we're seeing states not receive a lot of money or their share, and we're seeing even cities of populations over 500,000, which are slated to get some money, having to fight for that money as well with the state. So that's left cities with a smaller than 500,000 population just, clawing for the remainder of those dollars. Right now, we don't see any of those dollars coming down to cities. We're obviously, up to date on all those calls and on all that legislation, but it's just a matter of, operating like we're not going to get it, but hoping that we do get it because we really do need it. I think I can speak for all the local governments out there. Small cities are really suffering and bleeding because of this.
Yeah, and I think it's, from what I've seen so far, and I'm not keeping as close an eye as I'm sure you are on what the legislation is, it seems like there may be more, what's more likely or more predictable perhaps is reimbursement for direct COVID related expenses. What does that look like for the city right now?
Yeah, so what we've seen, that's typically done through FEMA. I'll put it that way, and that's as disaster recovery. So almost as if you had an earthquake and you declare local disaster, and then you declare statewide, and then the president declares a national disaster, and that makes us all eligible for FEMA dollars, which are reimbursed through Cal OES. We submit our direct costs, like you call them, and those are including overtime. So we are tracking overtime costs. Luckily for us this time around, and this is a big one for us, it's technology. Because of the nature of this pandemic, they are reimbursing technology costs and direct costs such as PPE, or we're having to buy the sneeze guards or extra cleaning supplies, things like that, resulting in direct costs as a result of the pandemic. We're seeing a little over 180,000 right now in those direct costs, but 180,000 doesn't do a lot to offset the budget. It certainly helps, and it's certainly helped us transition towards technology. But again, it's peanuts in the large scheme of things.
Sure. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions for Karen?
Sure, Ed, I think you're on mute. Okay.
Yeah, just a quick question. As we head into the warmer months here, if we were to open up the library or another facility as a cooling center, does that fall under the public safety budget, or is that community services?
Typically, that's been under community services budget, but
Is there a way, I guess my thought was, is there a way to recategorize those types of expenses as a direct cost that we could apply for FEMA dollars for?
Potentially. I mean, the real direct costs there are staff costs. So we could potentially look at that. Though I will say we are trying to allocate everything as direct costs as specifically as possible. If we can't make the case for it, anything questionable won't be reimbursed. And our motto is we're certainly trying to get as much allocated as a COVID expense as we possibly can, understanding that not everything will qualify. And on finances side, we've provided memos and backups and receipts to everything that goes on the warrants to make sure that when we do get audited by FEMA, to get those reimbursements, because what happens typically with those types of reimbursements is they come in and they say, okay, you don't have this receipt, unallowed. They just go through they comb through everything and make sure that everything's there. And if one, item is not justified, then they'll remove that cost. So we're also trying not to put too much that would be unreasonable, where we might actually not get it reimbursed and say, we predict 300 and it actually comes back at 150. So that's certainly a cost we'll look at, though.
All right, thank you.
Ed, if I may, just so you know that we have on our website locations of current emergency cooling centers. If it becomes 100 degrees today, tomorrow, we have that option. Also, you can call 211 for a list of emergency cooling centers that are open right now in LA County. Just an FYI.
Thanks, Chief.
Chief, let me follow that up. It's helpful that the information is on the website, but given that this past week, LA County opened up cooling centers, is there any type of proactive communication of that information out to residents? Or proactive communication of that out to our seniors?
So we're communicating that message out through our Neighborhood Watch program. We're putting it out through social media. We speak any of the town hall meetings or the council meetings. We're bringing it up to everybody's attention that they are available. So word of mouth, getting to the organizations that need to hear the message is kind of how we're getting it out.
Okay, let me suggest that you add CERT into that list, because that's another 400 people that it gets out.
Absolutely.
And by that same token, I just want to add that if you all have received the online engagement survey, if you could take that survey, if you could share it with all your groups. I know Mr. Ehrlich just talked about the CERT group. Any community groups that you may have that might spread the word to this survey would be really helpful. As we continue to face these financial challenges, the more participation we get, the more engagement we get, the more we can be sure that we are prioritizing the community.
Karen, quick question. Is the city currently on a hiring freeze, especially with respect to PD having vacancies? Yeah, so I guess at some point, when you're talking about overtime, I mean, obviously you get into morale and effectiveness issues with too much overtime, but is there a point where if we're in a hiring freeze, we end up paying more money in overtime than it would be to just fill those positions?
Yeah, and that is a consideration with the hiring freeze. There are some positions that, while there is a hiring freeze, there are some positions that we just absolutely need, such as public safety or a city engineer, things like that, that we only have one, that we would cease to operate those functions without, then we would move forward with hiring.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Karen from the other commissioners? All right, well, I want to thank you for coming, and city manager also. You guys can sign off if there's nothing else. I see someone coming to the podium.
Jeremy, it's the city manager.
Good morning, commissioners. I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time today to listen to our budget presentation and to ask questions. And just to let you know, I'm here in the room. I know you've had questions for Karen, but I'm happy to answer questions as well if you have anything for me today.
Any questions for the city manager? Doesn't look like there's any. Thank you for coming and making yourself available for questions.
My pleasure. Let me just emphasize the message that Karen just issued as well. We are making this presentation to all 80-plus commissioners in the community with the hopes that you will help be part of our communications team and that you will share this information with your friends, your family, your neighbors. We're hoping you'll share it on your social media if you have that. We're hoping you'll share it via email. As Karen said, we'd like to reach as many residents as possible. This is a really critical year for budget conversations, and there are some extremely difficult decisions coming forward. So we'd like as much participation as possible. So we were hoping that all of you and all of our other commissioners will help serve as ambassadors on this issue and help us spread the word that, that we really need to hear from our residents right now. Thank you for that.
Okay, Karen, let me ask, the PowerPoint presentation you just put up, is that available on the website? You're on mute.
Thank you. We will be making it available on our website. This is the first presentation we've made, so we'll post it up there as well.
Okay, good.
Oh, I had a quick question about the budget outreach. I was doing it, and it appears to be two parts. The first part being kind of a plan your own budget feature, and then the second part asking about priority for community services and things of the sort. There's kind of like a verification wall for the address. Does that apply to one or both? So I wasn't entirely sure. Did the make your own budget part get submitted before I had to verify my address, or that part only applies to the second part, if you get what I'm asking?
I believe it only applies to the second part. I don't know why. It's the type of survey. It creates that on its own. So I don't know why that is assigned to one survey versus another type of survey. But that's the way the OpenGov determines that.
Sure, and so yeah, and I think that it's important to make sure that people from the community are actually the ones filling out the survey, not some people from wherever with a different agenda. But that may, some people may be less willing to provide that information. But I think it's kind of what we have to do.
Yeah, agreed. It is partially what we have to do. But again, if you all put it out towards your network, I think people that live in town and in the community are very willing to put out their information and say, this is stand for their community. So I haven't seen any issues yet with people including their information, but we'll monitor that and see if those responses need to be qualified in any way.
Well, thank you. If there's nothing else, thanks a lot for coming and presenting to us.
Thank you again.
Thanks, Karen.
All right, so we can move to the next item on the agenda, which is a COVID-19 update from Fire and PD.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start with just giving a brief overcap of where we sit in LA County with current statistics. Although I will say I'm not going to dive into too much at the state level. All this information is available on the county and state website. But as we're dealing with here in LA County, as reported today, we just cleared 31,000 cases with 1,530 associated deaths. South Pasadena is reporting 100 cases in the city and 107 at the skilled nursing facility. The 107 at the skilled nursing facility does include 29 staff members. So there's 78 residents at the facility that are positive. So out of the entire city, that leaves 22 citizens outside the skilled nursing facility that would be positive for COVID. And with that number, there's 13 associated deaths, and all of those deaths are associated with the skilled nursing facility.
Paul, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Possibly, wouldn't some of the 29 employees also be city residents?
They could be, and we reached out to LA County for clarification if that was a hard line. LA County responded back that, they try. Their goal is not to duplicate responses. So those gray areas would involve if a staff member did not fill out their test when they took the test, if they put a different address down, then the county wouldn't know, so they would put them as a resident of South Pass. But typically, even staff members would be identified by the resident that they live permanently, and that's the goal. And then as far as the testing, obviously testing remains a big challenge here, not only just in LA County, but throughout the state. We're getting better at it. The numbers are coming up. Close to 955,000 have been tested in the state. and over 200,000 now in LA County, although we need to get those numbers up. The percentages are holding pretty consistent as we continue with testing, with 13 to 14% of those tested are coming out positive, and 18% of those are requiring hospitalization, and 29% of all those requiring hospitalization are requiring treatment in an ICU, and 19% are requiring to be on a ventilator. At the last council meeting, council did give direction to staff to look into possible outreaches for South Pasadena to bring testing sites closer to South Pasadena. Currently, there are still 38 sites in the county, with the Rose Bowl being the closest one to South Pasadena residents. It's also been brought to our attention that navigating some of the sign-up sites has been a little difficult, and in terms of getting the site closest to us. But again, when it's been hit and miss with us, when we've tried, we were able to navigate both the county's website and the state's website to sign up for tests locally. And again, the nearest one to South Pass would be the Rose Bowl, El Monte Airport, Frank Hodgkins Training Center in LA City. But again, those are all listed on the website. Operationally, the fire department, again, as reported, we're fully staffed. We remain, we don't have any quarantine personnel at this point. We have had exposures, obviously, but we've been wearing full PPEs, so they were not considered high-risk exposures that would require any quarantining of staff. Our PPE supply for the fire department remains good, projected 2 to 3 months out. And again, we have orders in place with private vendors as placeholders if, in fact, the county is not able to deliver those PPEs. Although if you've listened to recent updates from the governor, they have been receiving large shipments through their private vendors and shipping them out through the counties throughout the state. Staff continues to do morning checks. That would include daily temperature checks, actually twice a day. That information is logged, as well as a simple questionnaire just to see how they're feeling and whether or not they have any of the base symptoms. Outreach that fire department has been participating in, not only working obviously very close with our skilled nursing facility to try and ensure that they have adequate PPEs, which is probably the biggest challenge for skilled nursing facilities throughout the state, is ensuring that their staff has adequate PPEs to properly treat and protect themselves as they provide that treatment. Our nursing facility did in fact receive a shipment from county of N95 masks. Gowns and additional N95s are what's needed. We're hopeful that they're going to get those. County understands that this is a top priority and is working very diligently to get those. We've also connected them with a private vendor who has these PPEs in stock as well. So I'm confident we will get them properly protected as we move forward. We've also reached out to all the grocery stores in the city to ensure that they are following best practices as far as guidelines set forth by CDC and LA County Health, which they are. And all the stores are really reporting they're mandated to reduce their occupancy load by 50%. They're reporting about a 20 to 30% occupancy load on average throughout the day. So they didn't need any assistance at this time. Probably our biggest concern moving forward right now is the very active brush fire season that we're expecting. Again, I don't know if you've heard it on the news recently, but Northern California and what would be within our strike team area or our mutual aid area is in a drought, and the brush fire season projections look very active for this year. So again, we're trying to work out the details on how base camp is going to look and how they are going to be able to maintain social distancing and protect the fire crews as they respond on these large-scale fires. In the city here locally, we've already started our brush clearance program, reaching out to the owners of that own either improved properties with a home on it, making sure that the vegetation is clear, and those that also have vacant lots in the city. And we've also started with Public Works to look at the city-owned unimproved lots to make sure that we're getting a jump start on this brush season. We continue to decontaminate the fire station daily, pretty much twice a day, and that includes all living areas of the fire station. The apparatus is cleaned and decontaminated after every response. The response, we're remaining above average at this point. We're starting to, as we start to lift some of the orders, obviously we would expect our call load to increase a little bit. We're a little bit over our call load. So, but nothing that's outside of the scope of being able to respond. Let's see, I have one more. I think that is it. I will turn it over to Chief Ortiz unless there is any questions of fire. Seeing no questions, I will turn it over to Chief Ortiz.
Good morning. First of all, please know that your city is safe and your staff is healthy. And I say that because it means a lot. We focus, both Chief Riddle and I focus a lot of energy, a lot of time on our staff. It's important to know that they're doing okay, that they are happy to be here, and 99.9% of the folks would rather be nowhere else than at work here providing first-line services. So it's important to know that we are healthy, we're motivated to get through this coronavirus pandemic. Like fire, we continue to decontaminate vehicles and workspaces on a routine basis, coupled with taking temperatures and completing a questionnaire, ensuring that our folks are healthy before they start their shift and at the end of their shift. Our officers are keeping busy. Although calls for service are down 19%, they're out making pedestrian checks. They're out on burglary task force. They're out at our parks. They're out with our unhoused neighbors, making contact and providing resources. Although, again, the calls for service are down, they continue to stay busy. And when we're out in the field, we also utilize our personal protective equipment as needed. Just an update on a few operational items. First, I want to thank Commissioner Alsaroff. Last meeting, he suggested that we look into some type of the domestic violence outreach campaign that other agencies in LA County were doing. At this point, the program is fully deployed. I'm not sure if you can see this particular poster here, but we have posters like this that are deployed at essential locations throughout the city so that folks know that if they're having difficulty communicating the need for help, if there's problems at home, if they're afraid to talk to anybody, we encourage folks to reach out. There's a few different websites on the posters. We also have that information on our website. So again, thank you, Commissioner Alsaroff. It's an ongoing, and like anytime you roll out a deployment like this, it's an ongoing maintenance where our officers at calls for service are handing out pamphlets with the same information on it. So again, thank you, Commissioner Alsaroff, for directing us and suggesting that we move on that. We have a project called Lock It and Keep It, and I've mentioned it a few times at the last council meetings, talking about an increase from thefts from parked vehicles. Parked vehicles are being left unlocked. Residents are leaving computers, wallets, purses. And so we've really kind of gone on an outreach, public education outreach to really kind of hammer the point home that we really need to keep our valuables inside our house. We need to lock our vehicles, and we need to make sure that we're vigilant throughout our neighborhoods. Over the last few weeks, we've had a task force deployed at certain times. And when I say certain times, it's having a crime analysis on board with the Investigations Bureau, detectively. He can narrow down within 3 to 4 hours when most crimes are happening and where. So that information is fed to our task force, and we're out there vigilantly, not only looking for potential or trying to prevent potential crimes, but also we have brochures that have been made up as a reminder to folks that park their vehicles on the street to lock their vehicles up. To date, I think we have just over 500 brochures that have been handed out, put on the windshield of these vehicles, just to remind them. We went from 12, 13 thefts from vehicles 1 week down to 2. Earlier, or last week, it reported that we had 0. So again, our efforts continue. We have had, I want to say, a total of 5 arrests that have helped quiet things down. As I said, we continue to contact our unhoused neighbors in town. We continue to check on them, provide them services, let them know that Union Station is alive and well, and that our resources are there for them. Several of us are familiar with the one unhoused resident that's on Huntington. He was gone for a short time. He was actually placed in a hotel through the Project Room Key. Again, that was brought up a couple times. I think it was Commissioner Ehrlich who brought it up, asking for more information about it. We followed up with it. We were able to get the funding through our housing navigator, and to date, I believe he has been placed again at a hotel. Then we had another resident that used to stay across from Rite Aid, and we were Albert, and we were able to get him a hotel close by. So again, it takes time, it takes resources, but it also takes compassion. And just know that your officers out there have a lot of compassion for these folks that are challenged. They don't have accessibility to the resources. What I did share with council last week was the psyche part of getting them to a hotel is they get accustomed to sleeping in a bed, taking a shower, brushing their teeth in a sink, and having a sense of security. So when they come back out of those hotels, I see fear in their eyes, and I've spoken with several of them, and I see fear in their eyes, and they want to go back in. So the psyche part of it is kind of cool, because we want to encourage them to get up off their feet and continue to walk down a healthy life. One last thing, I'll just give you an operational update on statistics. Although Part 1 crimes are down 19%, and you may hear Part 1 crimes. Let me just explain what Part 1 crimes are. They're homicide, rape, robbery, assault, burglary, larceny, grand theft auto, and arson. So when you hear the term Part 1 crimes, you're talking about those particular types of crimes. Although those are down, we have a significant increase overall, specifically in stolen vehicles. Stolen vehicles, as part of this burglary task force, is to get out there and be proactive. We've had a 63% increase in stolen vehicles. And not just in our city, I think overall in the county there's a 75% increase in stolen vehicles. So I do know the Sheriff's Department and bigger organizations are working with smaller organizations like ours to figure out what's going on and put a stop to it. Shoplifts are up 45%. And again, thefts from vehicles are up 86%. So we've identified the problems in the city. We're addressing them as needed, and we'll continue to provide updates. Besides that, that's my COVID-19 update, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Chief. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I'll just throw one out. Chief, with the beginning on Friday of the relaxation of some of the orders, do we have any issues down at the golf course or parks or anything?
You know, we didn't. I will tell you that last week, when I heard that we were going to be relaxing some things and going into phase 2, I put a lot of energy and time into trying to stay out in front of how do we provide people education who don't really understand what's required, what can be done, what can't be done. All too often, someone will call 911 and say there's someone out there, running without a mask. And so instead of tying up resources and sending out officers and sending out a supervisor, we've educated our dispatchers, and we put out information on our websites and public outreach to here are the do's, here are the don'ts. Health order violations, we suggest you calling the LA County Public Health Office. Here's the phone number, and here's the contact information. So we're kind of going through a step informational as far as here are the rules, here are the do's, here are the don'ts, here's who you should contact, and eventually if we need to go out to parks, we will definitely go out to parks. Haven't seen much of an increase other than Mother's Day yesterday. There were people out at the park, but I mean they were behaving themselves. We saw a lot of folks wearing masks, and we had a cadet roving between parks. to ensure we got compliance. But overall, our residents were compliant.
Speaking about education, somebody sent me a copy of the email from the one resident about the tennis courts. And well, I think they were a little overreactionary. I think they also raised a good point about, why can't the tennis courts be opened yet? I understand that our hands are tied by the county and the state, but is that something we can take back to our representatives, either Barger or elsewhere, and try and get the tennis courts?
The city manager's here. She's just stepped up to the podium. She wants to address that question.
Good morning. Yes, happy to answer that question. We did have that very specific conversation with Barger's office last week. She said that she would look into it. She said they have had a number of requests for tennis courts to be open for singles only. But Dr. Ferrer, the county health officer, had been very specific about not wanting to open tennis courts at this time. So we know Barger's working on it. She's pushing it for us in a number of other cities. But for whatever reason, Dr. Ferrer is just not ready to do that yet. So we will continue to monitor that issue. And I'm available if you have any other questions about COVID. I'm available for questions on this issue as well.
I have a quick question. Back to the South Pasadena Care Center, comparing that facility to other nearby facilities, how is the infection rate, both of residents and staff? How is it comparable?
Ed, to your question, it's pretty standardized across the county, across the state, actually globally, if you look at the statistics. In talking to LA County's medical director, once the virus gets a foothold in these type of skilled nursing facilities, it's really hard to contain it just because of the amount of close person-to-person contact required to treat for the residents who live there. It's very difficult to prevent the spread. So our numbers, when you look on county's website, do seem higher. One thing is our care center was reported relatively early in the process, and they received testing of all residents and staff early on. So our numbers spiked pretty early. And you'll see those numbers across the county start to come up at the skilled nursing facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, do we know how many residents are there? Because I think they're licensed for up to 156.
Yeah, current numbers are right about 100. In fact, the last number was exactly 100. And we did confirm also that they are not receiving any new residents during this time.
Okay, so it sounds like then 78 out of 100 residents have currently tested positive.
That's correct. And another note on the skills center too is if you look at when those numbers have held steady for the past week and a half, give or take, and our responses there has dropped off. I think we've only responded there one time in the past week, which is, again, just a good indicator that things have stabilized. And again, that's pretty standard throughout the county and the state. Once it runs through, those who get affected, obviously it's a new sickness to some, and then those who get really sick get transported out, and those who are able to be treated in place remain and recover.
Okay, let me just toss out, and I should have asked this while Karen was still in the room. What are your thoughts on whether the police fire open house is going to go on in September, if that's going to be a victim of the budget cuts?
You know, I can say we have discussed it. I don't know if it would be a matter of budget driving that decision. It's going to be a matter of whether or not mass gatherings, which as it looks right now, it does not look like a gathering of that size would be allowed in the county. So don't think we've officially made the decision yet, but other cities have already announced. I know Glendale Fire is one of them. They are actually going and got a good response from doing some type of virtual open house in terms of, obviously it wouldn't be the same not being to go in person, but they've actually received a pretty good response from the community just doing a virtual safety fair open house over that week period.
Great, thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions?
I had a quick question. So we live close to Garfield Park, and I noticed that for the past probably over a month now, there's been some signage in terms of you know, I think it says something like keep social distance. And I'm wondering if, and we actually have kind of a bird's eye view over the park and tend to see what's going on over there and peek over every once in a while. And we're not calling over to the police every time we see, a close call of people walking by each other, but that's happening a lot. And I'm wondering, part of it is, and I think we may have had this discussion before, part of it is I think some people don't, or maybe now especially, think that things are easing up, it's not as necessary. Part of it maybe they don't understand what keeping 6 feet away means. I think they're keeping distance when they're sitting out, but perhaps as they're sort of passing each other, not as much. But the question that I have is, are you seeing any strategies that other municipalities are using for parks? I know that, for example, at Lacey Park, there's sort of you can only walk one direction around the loop so that you avoid people going one way and the other. The thing that concerns me is that there's a pretty narrow walkway, and people seem pretty tied to staying on the walkway. And there are a lot of children that are running around, and there are a lot of sort of people doing exercise, unfortunately, close to the walkway. Are there strategies without sort of having somebody patrolling and saying, please keep your distance, that have been used in other parks that might be useful for us to use here?
I think our continued community outreach and trying to hit home with our folks that the reason why are we doing social distancing? I think that as we rotate from phase 2 to phase 3, you're going to see a lot less people exercising and walking in the park. That's probably about a week and a half out. But between now and then, maybe a couple weeks, between now and then, we'll continue with our educational outreach. And we could hand out flyers at the parks. But again, we have a lot of our folks, our cadets, our parking enforcement officers. That's their primary focus right now, is out there engaging the community and reminding them to stay the 6 foot. So it keeps them busy. It keeps our residents educated. But we'll continue on with our outreach.
Thank you, Chief.
All right, if we don't have any other questions on that, we can go to council liaison communications.
Good morning, everybody. I just want to let you know the council did have a session with Senator Anthony Portantino, and he updated us on what's going on in the legislature as far as legislation and things relating to COVID-19. And we have an upcoming session with Congresswoman Judy Chu on Wednesday. And I might ask the city manager, I don't know if that's open to the public, if they can watch it or not, but we will be talking with her. And I did have one question for Chief Riddle about the citizens of the city, not the ones at the care center, but the other citizens. Are they, have any of them been hospitalized with the disease, or are they just tested positive?
Councilmember, the information that we get, just because of the HIPAA laws still in place, we just get information of positive COVID, and we don't necessarily get any follow-up as to whether or not they were hospitalized or where the expected or exposure took place.
Okay, Dan, that's understandable. Otherwise, I don't have anything other to report.
Councilman Schneider, that will be open for the public view, the Wednesday night council meeting.
Very good, very good. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for our council liaison? All right, the next item is staff liaison. They basically talked about their departments already, but I did have one just quick question. Um, is Traffic Enforcement Bureau going to be put on hold, Chief Ortiz, due to all this budget and, COVID stuff?
The traffic bureau is still in the works. We're moving people around from patrol back to the bureau back to the traffic enforcement. We're hoping that should take place sometime in June.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr.
Is
Chair,
there
I
any
did have one additional, I forgot to mention, especially now that we have a new commissioner on board. Last month, we offered up tours of the Emergency Operations Center, although it's really just in a virtual state. Grace and Alan both participated in a half-hour tour and just kind of walked through how the city puts in for reimbursement, tracks our expenditures, and what the EOC would look like if we had to expand it out. So that invitation still holds. We can facilitate that tour pretty easily. We can provide the mask, and then it's just one-on-one, myself and a commissioner for about a half hour. So that invitation still holds. And I'd also like to just point out one statistic that is coming out of the county. It's kind of a concerning statistic in terms of not necessarily here in South Pasadena, but throughout the county, is that our transport percentages throughout the county are down drastically. And they're down with calls. People simply are not calling 911 anymore. They're afraid to for what would typically be, well, they're very serious health conditions. Those would be, strokes, heart attacks. They're delaying the symptoms because they're afraid to go to the emergency room. So we're proactively trying to reach out to our community to say the fire department is responding normal operations to all calls for service. Obviously, the outcomes for those patients who delay calling 911, the outcomes are not very good. So we're trying to get the word out that if you have any needs in terms of 911, do not hesitate to call. And that concludes it.
Okay, thank you. Next item is Commissioner Communications.
Jeremy, before we jump there, got a question for Chief Ortiz.
Mine's. Okay, go ahead.
Chief, I know you got this. I got an email from a resident about the city's plan to combat homelessness, which was a report that came out in, I think it was September of 2018. And they had two specific questions. One was whether or not the task force was still in existence. And the second one was whether or not the Regional Riverbed Cities Work Group was still meeting.
Thank you for that question, and I apologize. I meant to update the Public Safety Commission on a meeting we had, virtual meeting we had with residents and Union Station staff about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We had a group of residents who were concerned because they wanted to learn more about where were we at operationally, what were we doing with our homeless grant funding, the Measure H funds, tell me what a housing navigator is. And so it was a great opportunity to educate a bunch of residents together. And the unique part about the meeting was we had Union Station there facilitating the meeting. They had their experts. Again, Union Station is the experts when it comes to providing resources, finding out what works, what doesn't work with our homeless community. So they went on for, I want to say, half an hour, 45 minutes as part of the presentation, just giving them updates on what a holistic approach is when it comes to homelessness. They are the resident experts. We look to them for direction. We work with them, and we have a great partnership. So the meeting went for just over an hour. Follow-up emails had requested copies of our grants, copies of our outreach plan from 2018. That information was provided to the residents. I ended the communication with, as soon as this pandemic outbreak stops and we're in phase 3, is to have them come out with our teams that are deployed addressing the homeless. The two questions you had, Alan, is so we did have the meeting, and we had, according to Lieutenant Robledo, there were 4 or 5 meetings after the plan was deployed in 2018 that followed through. The official meetings with the down by the riverbed, those actually, they're not scheduled meetings. Those seem to happen between our teams and the folks from Union Station and LASA who are down there providing resources. We just seem to be meeting more than probably twice a month out at the locations, out on the riverbeds, talking, working collaboratively with each other, and sharing insight on the new, the old, unhoused residents, neighbors, and their needs. So I'm going to formally reply to that resident with those 2 questions this week. I just got a little busy last week, but I definitely will follow up with her.
Okay, thank you for that.
Anything else for the staff liaison? All right, so for commissioner communications, I was looking at our work plan for next month. It's actually supposed to discuss National Night Out and police and fire open house, which kind of what the Chief Riddle was mentioning. I was under the assumption that that's probably going to get canceled in any type of physical, execution of it. So maybe there'll be something virtual or something, but if we can get an update on what that might look like next month, that would be good. But what I wanted to propose for next month is to talk more about the Public Safety Commission charter, because with now we have the Mobility Transportation Infrastructure Commission in place and the Public Works Commission in place. If you look at our old charter, it has a lot to do with pedestrian and traffic safety, which outside of the enforcement side of it will probably fall under one of those other 2 commissions. So I would like to put that on our next month's agenda to talk more about the charter. And if we have any other suggestions for items to put on the agenda, just share them at this time. So we can go down the list. As for commissioner communications, why don't we go to Scott, our newest commissioner? And do you have any questions, comments, concerns?
No, I actually went through and watched the entire last month's video yesterday, just to get an idea of what to expect here. Just want to introduce myself. My name is Scott Lamb. I actually grew up in the San Gabriel Valley, and I worked in federal government at some point, which brought me to DC, and I moved to South Pasadena in 2011. I have a kid that goes to Monterey Hills, and I'm just glad to be a part of this. So this is my first entry into city government.
Well, welcome. Happy to have you.
Yeah, but other than that, I don't have any questions. Just trying to get my feet wet and get used to what's going on here.
Okay, Ed?
This past week, the South Pasadena Chinese American PTO and the U.S. Asian Art and Culture Association made a donation of PPE to our first responders, city staff, and community volunteers. And I'd like to thank them for that generous donation. And that's all I have this week.
Thanks, Ed. Grace?
Welcome, Scott. I do a lot of updates regarding the schools. From my last meeting, everything's still going on as usual with our virtual meetings, etc. There is a distance learning survey that the district has pulled out for each family to fill out per child, and it is due this Friday, May 15th. And they will continue to have the school year next year, the 2020-21 school year, to begin on the second Thursday of August, which is August 13th. They don't know what it will look like. It will be distance learning or the facilities will open, but again, everything's always up in the air until we know an update. So that's the update for now. Oh, and I apologize early if I have to leave for the kids to log in and stuff. Thanks.
I have another meeting at 10, so I'm hoping that we can wrap it up before then. Stephanie?
No updates from my end, but I do want to say welcome to our newest commissioner, Commissioner Lamb. And thank you to our city staff for the important work that you've been doing and for keeping us updated.
Agreed. Alan?
I'll just throw in two things. Tentatively, we can put the CERT presentation that would have happened last month onto next month's agenda. I discussed with Paul whether or not we can try and move forward the PowerPoint presentation we had. Obviously, a lot is still in flux as the year's going to flow out. So we'll send you an update on that in 2 weeks before the next agenda gets prepared. But the commission does have some regularly scheduled programs that we had meant to address each month. So at least on the CERT end, I want to try and keep up with that. Secondly, and Scott may have noticed these as well, at last week's city council meeting, I sent out a huge thank you to the Public Works Department for putting up high visibility pedestrian safety panels and crosswalks. So we just got one here at the corner of Linden and Fremont, which is between Monterey Road and the high school. And we've got kids crossing to the middle school, kids crossing to the high school, and cars that are constantly in the intersection. And since those went up, it's been extremely easy to cross the street. And the intersection has stayed open so that cars on Linden can get across Fremont to the east and west. Taking a walk around the city, I saw that up by the Monterey Hills School. I think it's at the corner of Indiana and Via Del Rey. They put these high-vis panels up on all three sides of the T intersection. And I've seen a few more of them at other points. So again, a huge shout out to Public Works for making that happen.
Okay, Amin?
I would echo Stephanie's comment. Thank you to our chiefs and to their departments and to city staff as well. It's a challenging and uncertain time, and I think we're all trying to navigate it, and I appreciate all the effort that you guys are putting in and being out on the front line. So other than that, I don't have any other comment. Thank you. Other than welcome to Scott.
So are we all, are we good on those agenda items? Is there anything we want to add or bump with regard to discussion of charter and discussion of CERT? Okay, I don't think we need a motion as long as we kind of convey that and it's within staffing's bandwidth to do, we can go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 9:50. Thanks everyone for joining and welcome again to Scott, and thank you to staff and Karen and Stephanie, city manager, for joining our meeting. Thank you.
Great. So long.
Okay, everybody.
Stay safe.